Thank you very much. I call Ruth Maguire to be followed by Daniel Johnson.
Presiding Officer, the police violence in the United States, evidenced most recently in the murder of George Floyd, is reprehensible. It's one sickening incident in a litany of violent horrors that we see across the Atlantic from our TVs. But anyone watching in horror from 4,000 miles away and thinking that Scotland is not racist, anyone thinking that our institutions and structures, that our Scottish society is fair and equal, would be wrong. International solidarity is important, it's crucial, but if we're really honest, it's also pretty easy. In welcoming this debate this afternoon, Clare state, racism will not end with passing motions in Parliament. Without long-term commitments to anti-racist actions and policies, we'll not be able to reduce and ultimately eradicate racism in Scotland. Briefly, please.
I agree with what she said, that things won't change through passing motions. The last few days has shown us that doing things in the establishment way, the polite way, doesn't take us any further forward. And what's driven this has been direct action on the streets that has driven this change. That's the lesson that we have to learn.
Ruth Maguire.
Colleague Neil Finlay's made his point well there. Intercultural Youth Scotland share helpful do's and don'ts on their Twitter page. They highlight the real danger that engaging in empty gesturing about racism ends up being performative and a quiet way to continue systematic racism. Reflecting on their words and the words of Anis Sarwar, I say a hashtag, a picture taking the knee, are not the same as exacting meaningful, lasting change. And to quote Intercultural Youth Scotland directly, racism is not only valid or worth addressing when there's a worldwide focus on it. It's important that organisations consider their actions continuously, including evaluating their own positions before recent events, actions during it, and their plans for when the media focus dies down. Organisations making token efforts during a time of crisis is not true allyship, especially when a lot of these organisations have too frequently stayed silent when these issues have been brought to their attention in private. Presiding Officer, the Equalities and Human Rights Committee has a current inquiry into race inequality, looking specifically at employment. The call for evidence is open until the 30th of June, and we'd very much welcome views and opinions from those with direct experience. Lived experience will best help us hold public authorities, including the Scottish Government, including the Scottish Parliament, to account. The challenge, the real and urgent challenge for us here, is in taking sustainable, meaningful action at home here in Scotland. That will involve difficult conversations, listening, acting, and in some cases, just being quiet and stepping aside to let the voices that we find so easy to ignore speak their truth. I'm going to focus most of my remarks on party political representation for a couple of reasons. This Parliament hasn't focused on race inequality enough, and we clearly see that we're not diverse. Secondly, though, because that's something that each and every one of us in this chamber here can change. No hiding, no excuses. We all have a direct influence over our own party's policies and internal workings. We can change things, and we can do that before the next election. I can't pass my mic to a black or minority ethnic sister in this Parliament because there's no one here. And that's not good enough, but neither is just saying so. Our apologies, sympathies, tears and declarations of solidarity are not enough. There needs to be action. And in my party, we're very fortunate that we've already had an example of what to do to rebalance the over-representation of white men and increase representation of an underrepresented group. Before the last Scottish parliamentary election, the SNP acted to increase women's representation in our party, action that worked. Those mechanisms, that action, had to be hard fought for on the conference floor and followed up with meaningful change to practice. And thank Nicola Sturgeon for her strong leadership in driving forward those changes that had previously been deemed too hard or unnecessary as things would balance out eventually. I also express gratitude to Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh for the meaningful, supportive and successful work she did as a women's officer through the Women's Academy, conference and mentoring. The argument that many of us made at that time about not being prepared to simply wait to see improvements in women's representation move at glacial speeds stands here today. I know that with similar mechanisms and structures, we can overcome the structural barriers in the way of BME women. Women whose talent we're missing from this chamber. We must have a parliament that's more representative of the citizens we serve. And that's the thing, diversity isn't just about fairness to the excluded group. It produces better results as well. Presiding Officer, I might not be able to pass my mic in the chamber, but I can draw colleagues' attention to the great online list of women of colour, experts and commentators in Scotland. To quote the curator, Talat Yaqub, if you need a speaker or someone in the media for interviews, use it. If you know someone who should be on it, share it. And if you're a woman of colour, please be on it. Presiding Officer.